Hello everybody. Welcome to the CSI's webinar on demystifying DevSecOps. DevSecOps stands for Development, Security, and Operations. It's an approach to culture, automation, and platform design that integrates security as a shared responsibility throughout the entire IT lifecycle. DevOps describes a culture of cooperation and automation in the software factory. We have Anish Kumar today who will help us understand what DevSecOps is and how we can optimize development, security, and operations efforts for an enterprise with processes and technology in place. Anish is a seasoned technologist with over 2 decades of application development, system administration, and architecture experience in building and transforming enterprise solutions in telecom, pension, logistics, and e-commerce domain. He is a senior architect at Capgemini and has experience in architecting Greenfield and Brownfield for cloud native, and DevSecOps solutions. In this session, we'll broadly cover what is the benefit that we get using DevOps, why is DevOps needed, and how to implement DevOps. Before I pass on the stage to the speaker, I would like to ask to tell you if there are any questions, please leave them in the chat box. And Anish Garu, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Sandeep, for that introduction. And before starting the session, a couple of callouts. Thank you, CSI Hyderabad chapter, Kirti, for giving me an opportunity to talk about the topic that is demystifying DevSecOps. Participants for taking time out of your busy schedule to attend the session, and really happy that you are interested in knowing what DevSecOps is. Hopefully, I'll cover major areas that would help you gain certain insights and knowledge on this topic. Last but not least, if someone wants to connect with me beyond this session, feel free to scan this code and you can send out a request, and I would be more than happy to help you with any queries related to DevSecOps or any further queries you might have. So that was about the context setting. Let's start with our session, that is demystifying DevSecOps. Maybe Sandeep has already covered what I was planning to cover in the entire session, but he summarized it really well. So let's start with understanding what DevOps is. DevOps is nothing but a combination of cultural philosophy, practices, tool that increases an organization's ability to deliver application and services at high velocity. And like Sandeep mentioned, it is development and operation coming together to achieve these. So let's try and understand it further with famous or infamous feedback loop, which most of you might have seen. This is typically a DevOps feedback loop wherein it always starts with the plan, then code, then build, test, release, deploy, operate, monitor. So whatever you see on the left-hand side is typically a development activity. On the right-hand side, it is an operations activity. But with DevOps, the intention is to ensure these two activities are not done in silos. Everything should be planned well in advance. Collaboration should be done between development and operations team, implementation. So let's try and understand different phases. Planning. Planning is going to be critical when you want to release a feature. So how can planning be done? This is just a recommendation. It could depend on enterprises, how they want to do it. But the best way of planning things would be agile methodology. By agile methodology, I would say you must have heard about Scrum way of working, Kanban way of working, safe way of working. So these would help an enterprise plan things better. Once the planning is done through PI planning or different activities. And am I audible? Sorry, I just heard a beep.
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Once the planning is done, then it starts about the execution. In agile way of working, the execution is split into smaller cycles. We call it sprints and different terms depending on which methodology you are following. Then get the actual implementation is done. Once the actual implementation is done, there is a need for build that needs to be carried out, test that needs to be executed. Once these three things are done, the feature is ready for release. Once it is identified for release, it should be deployed. Once the deploy is done, the operate and monitor aspect is a ongoing process, and these inputs from these should always go back into the planning, and improvement should continue to happen to provide the right benefits to the enterprises or end customer of the enterprises. So that is all about the feedback loop and how it helps. Now, moving on, normally DevOps is philosophies, practices, and tools. There is no typical set standard how it should be done. And why I'm saying that, one size doesn't fit all. That is the philosophy. Every enterprise has its own different needs, different technology stack, and so on and so forth. So you cannot create a common platform which is going to fit for every enterprise's needs. So there are different strategies that one should consider when planning their DevOps journey. And it talks about culture, automation, lean, measurement, and recovery. And this is the recommendation or the approach recommended by safe ways of working. And this is known as Calmer approach, culture, automation, lean, measurement, and recovery. Let's deep dive into what culture is. Culture is all about how we are trying to get multiple teams together, dev and ops. So in early days, we had separate teams, development team, operation team. They were focused in their own activity with limited knowledge of how development activity is done and limited knowledge of how operations are carried out. So that is a culture change that DevOps recommend. Instead of working in silos, both the teams have to come together and try to achieve the single goal or the greater good for the enterprise. Automation is the key. Most of us might have heard that automation is the key to survival. So what it recommends is we need to identify what are the manual processes, and we need to plan how we can automate them in order to reduce the waste or repeated efforts to carry out the same activity over and over again. Lean is one of the philosophies from agile ways of working, which talks about when we talk about sprints. Sprints has a limited capacity, and with limited capacity, only specific features could be delivered. So, and how that is delivered, there are different folks or people or developers working in a Scrum team who identifies the feature they need to work upon and continue to work upon it until it is completed, and then they pick it up. So one of the key ways of achieving lean way of working would be always enforce work WIP limits, work in progress. So what WIP limit suggests is one developer number of stories in progress should never be more than the developers working in the Scrum team. That is how we can achieve the lean way of working and also deliver the planned features. The next one is measurement. Always measure. So when we talk about operate and monitor, these are key areas which will help us measure the success or failure of a service. And these inputs should be considered for planning the upcoming feature releases, so on and so forth. Recovery. As a team or as a practice, we should always plan for failure in advance. So there are ways or mechanisms like chaos engineering, which helps break the existing landscape and which can be leveraged to understand how quickly can we recover from a failure. So these are few high-level strategies which we should consider while strategizing our DevOps journey. Now, one of the key aspects from the feedback loop is it is not just about your application development. DevOps always talks about multiple areas. One of the key aspects tying back to the recovery would be unless there are two primary components in your landscape. One is infrastructure, and then the second one would be the application. So unless your infrastructure is available, your application cannot be deployed, and vice versa. If your applications are not good enough, having right infrastructure cannot help us deploy the workload. So the development activity from infrastructure as well as application should always go hand in hand, and this can be achieved with the planning and the automation aspect. So this is all about different philosophies and strategies. Moving on, when we talk about DevOps adoption, the three pillars are cultural philosophies, practices, tools. So let's try and understand what are different cultural philosophies. I touched upon the removing silos. So that is one of the key aspects. Service ownership is something which a team should own. So when I talk about service ownership, I touched upon the infrastructure aspect as well as the application aspect. When we talk about a DevOps team or a Scrum team, they should own individual piece. It could be an application, it could be an infrastructure, or it could be combination of both. That is what a service is. They should start taking the ownership. That is how we can achieve the right high availability and other aspect. Then quality and security is the third cultural philosophy. If I take a step back and think about waterfall way of working. It was divided into multiple phases. The first phase was development, the next phase was testing, and so on and so forth. So quality or testing was never carried out when development was done. But industry has evolved, and there are multiple ways of testing it while during the development. So, right, a unit cases could be created and functionality could be tested for right optimal level of quality and security. Security has always been an afterthought or was never considered as part of the development process. But when we talk about DevOps, everyone should focus on quality and security from the day one, and it should not be an afterthought. Once an issue is identified, let's fix it. So this is a shift left philosophy wherein we would want to identify things early so that it can be fixed early, and the next level of implementation or phases do not foresee or sorry for that. Next level of phases do not see change problems which can affect the customer experience. Moving from cultural philosophy, let's move into the practices part. So the recommendation is to have continuous integration, which again falls down into automation. Continuous integration is all about getting your recent changes, build it, package it, test it, scan it, so that the quality and security aspect can be identified at the initial phase itself. Then the second aspect is continuous delivery and deployment. Now, few of you must have heard about both the terms continuous delivery and continuous deployment, and few of them might have heard about the either one. So let me elaborate what continuous delivery is. Continuous delivery would be where there is a toll gate mechanism. If you want to deploy certain features on the higher environment, a person gets involved and they roll out the feature onto the higher environment. That is continuous delivery. And when we talk about continuous deployment, the implementation is 100% automated. The moment something is checked in, it gets promoted to different environment without any human intervention. So that is continuous deployment. So depending on enterprise's need, either of the approaches or practices can be implemented. Microservices. One of the key aspects which I touched upon earlier is how we can deliver features faster, right? So microservices is one of the approaches of achieving that. And what exactly microservices are? Typically, when we talk about early days, we had a huge code base which had multiple functionality tied together and was deployed together. Let me try and explain this with an example. Let's take the case of a banking implementation and net banking. Most of us might have used the net banking features. So in net banking, you get features like banking operations, credit card operations, your DMAT operations, so on and so forth. Now, let's assume if these are all tied together and deployed as a single unit or a monolith, if we have to make a small change in your net banking services pertaining to banking operations, it has to go through a larger cycle. of testing, deployment, implementation, testing, deployment. Whereas if we break down the monolith implementation into smaller services which have the right interactions. So one of the services would be your banking operation, another one would be your credit card operations, and third would be your DMAT operations. So if a feature needs to be added into banking operation, it is all about changing smaller piece of code which can be deployed faster, and the feature is available to the end customer faster. So that is one of the recommendation or practices how we can achieve uh, speedy delivery. Infrastructure as a code, I touched upon. The dev part is not just about application development or infrastructure development, it is both. So everything are should be automated, and how this can be automated, there are ISE tools like Terraform, Ansible, and so on and so forth. So whatever the need is, it has to be coded, and that is how we can provision the infrastructure real time in order to cater to our application high availability needs, so on and so forth. Moving on to monitoring and logging. So this is tying back to the monitor operation, which provides us the right insight, how the service is behaving, how infrastructure is behaving. If the infrastructure is reeling under resource pressure, or your application is taking has a lot of requests and infrastructure is unable to cater to that request, that is how we can invoke the infrastructure as a code to provision the underlying infrastructure and scale your application, which can take care of your high availability needs or scaling needs. The last aspect is communication and collaboration. So communication and collaboration is going to be key when we talk about removing the silos. So there are different ways of implementing DevOps. There are few implementation which still have the development and operation team working in different Scrum or DevOps teams. There are few implementation which have both the capabilities in working in the same team. So if the first case is there, then communication and collaboration between the two teams become really critical to achieve the right DevOps implementation. Moving on to the last pillar, that is tools. There are broadly 3 items over here. SCM is nothing but your source code management. So if I have to give an example, most of us might have used Git services. Products around Git would be GitHub, GitLab, so on and so forth. So everything has to be checked in. Whatever new changes are coming in has to be checked into source code management, and that becomes your entry point for executing your continuous integration and continuous delivery or deployment pipelines. So this is one key tool that is required. Then from the process standpoint, I have mentioned Atlassian product, but there are different products which provide you planning tools, Scrum boards, and so on and so forth, which can be leveraged. And then the critical one is CNCF. So I would move out of the presentation mode and take you through CNCF landscape. Before, let me set the context what CNCF is. CNCF is a cloud native computing foundation which helps define standards or identify the projects which can help achieve different aspects of your cloud native implementation. And let me just zoom in. This is the landscape of CNCF, which has different projects or products which
Sorry to
fall like.
interrupt. Sorry to interrupt, Anish. I don't think so. The other screen is visible.
Okay, let me stop the share and reshare it. Thank you for that input. Okay, the screen. Please confirm if you're able to see the CNCF landscape
Yes.
web page.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so I was talking about tools, and I'll just go back a few steps wherein I mentioned one size cannot fit all enterprises need. That is where CNCF comes into play, which has a lot of tools which can help us achieve different activities, and I'll touch upon this in subsequent slides as well. So there are products or projects around database, streaming, messaging, application, scheduling, and orchestration. So Kubernetes is one of the target platforms which can help us achieve scaling and deployment orchestration of your containerized workload, then coordination services, RPC, so on and so forth, cloud native storage, container runtime, automation and configuration. So I touched upon the IAC aspect. So this is the different tools which can be leveraged for automating your infrastructure and configuration management. Container registry are set of tools or products which can help us achieve package creation, which I would touch upon. Security compliance. This is going to be a critical one, which will help us achieve the security. So there are different tools. I have this link available in the deck, which I would be sharing. So please feel free to go through these tools. I cannot touch upon every aspect, but let me just go to application and 1 second. This is a huge complex page. Finding the right section is difficult, but yeah, I found it. So application definition image build is one of the areas which will help us build your artifacts. Then there is one more area, which is application development. So observability and analysis. This will help us achieve the monitoring part. Okay, let me just see if I can quickly find what I was looking for. Otherwise, I'll go back to the presentation mode and come back to this in case time permits. Okay. Yep. Let's move back to the presentation mode. So you need to identify the right tools based on your competency or enterprise's need from the landscape, which can help you achieve the right DevOps adoption. Now, moving on, the next part is going to talk about DevSecOps. We have been talking about DevOps so far, but the slide says DevOps, aka DevSecOps. So it is nothing but different models that get leveraged in your enterprise implementation. And if your model has the right focus for security, Then we can use the DevOps or DevSecOps term interchangeably. So that is the only difference where we have right focus. So I spoke about dev team, operations team in the continuous feedback loop. When we are thinking about DevSecOps implementation, we also need to bring in the security team and quality team as part of the same team or same unit who can help deliver the right services. So that was about the DevSecOps. I'll take a pause now and see if there are any questions in the chat which needs immediate attention. Cancel. Okay. Let's see there. Oh, there are no questions so far, right? Okay. Then moving back to the discussion. Now, let's see how this can be implemented. I spoke about development, which the landscape which I was trying to look for, but it always starts with your developers process. And developers could be your application developer, infrastructure developer, security developers, and quality developers. And so the first aspect during DevSecOps implementation is defining the right processes for development, and how once the processes are in place, it takes the input from the planning. By planning, I mean your user stories from PI or Scrum, which the individual developer picks up based on their competency, and they continue to develop. So this is the typical developer's day-to-day activity, but how do we enforce the right developer environment? So it needs a lot of thinking. So it starts with your IDE development tools. So application development tools, which is part of your CNCF landscape umbrella, provides you right kind of security tools, testing tools, so development tools, your provisioning tools. Everything should be part of your development process, and right kind of scanning should be conducted during the development phase, which helps you achieve the shift left security aspect. So whenever you build the application through your IDE, be it IntelliJ or Eclipse, you need to execute these scans, or developers should execute these scans to enforce the right insights on if there is some vulnerability that has been introduced, if the code quality is good, if the testing is achieving the right standards, so on and so forth. And once they are happy with their implementation, they should commit it into the right repository. This is where the source code management aspect comes into play, wherein you need to push your changes based on the area of work. Automation configuration deals with your infrastructure and configuration code, and thereby configuration, it could be policy as code, so on and so forth, which needs to be developed and pushed, which gets enforced across your landscape. And then your application code goes into your application repository. And then these two gets collaborated or bundled together to provision or scale your infrastructure or application, depending on the use case that is done. So I mentioned about having the application development tool and carrying out the left shift scans at the first place, but there are chances that certain scans are not executed because of the timeline and pressure for a developer. Not everyone performs at the same level or do not follow all the right standard operating procedure. In order to revalidate whatever got checked in is at the right level, the same scan should be carried out in the build phase. Testing should be done once again. Package should be created. Once the package is created, it has to be stored into the container registry or artifactory. So if I give an example, JFrog, Nexus, these are different products which can help us provide these capabilities. And these artifacts are typically what gets deployed onto your target environment. And if we talk about continuous delivery, there are people who would choose the artifact and deploy it. And if the maturity of the enterprise or the DevOps team is really high, then whatever gets checked in, whatever artifact gets generated based on every check-in, those are deployed real time to the highest available environment following the set standard processes. Once these artifacts are generated, these can be versioned, and based on these versioning, right version could go into different environment. Now, when we talk about enterprises, typically not every enterprise has multiple level of environment. Development environment, staging environment, UAT environment, so on and so forth. So it goes through the right cycle, gets onto the higher environment, and the development environment testing is already carried out in the developer process. So we do not have the development environment in the right deployment aspect, this deployment aspect. And the last part is once your packages are deployed, observability and analysis, one of the areas within CNCF landscape, talking about different projects, can help us monitor your deployed workload or infrastructure. And if I have to give few examples here, Grafana, Prometheus, Nagios are few different tools which can help us achieve the monitoring, observability, and then we should not constrain ourselves only onto monitoring and observability. There has to be right kind of traceability, logging, and so on and so forth in order to achieve the or get the right insight from every situation. So this is a typical DevOps overview. And these do not have any tools and technology associated. You can utilize any of the tools within the CNCF landscape or existing enterprise landscape to fill the box and start leveraging those capabilities in the right area of need. So it was an overview. Let's try and understand how a typical continuous integration and deployment pipeline flows or workflow happens. So I mentioned about it starts with your commit into a branch or repository or branch. Then once the commit is done, that is where typically the workflow starts. The orchestrator for building and packaging your code listens into the recent changes, initiates itself, does the checkout of the recent changes, tries to fetch dependency, if any, pull artifacts from your container registry if those are required. And once this activity is done, it launches the build. Once the build is completed, scan needs to be carried out. It could be your vulnerability scan, quality checks, so on and so forth. Once these scans are completed and with right threshold in place, if the quality and vulnerability do not breach that threshold, build should be executed and an artifact should be generated. If it doesn't, it breaches the threshold, then a report needs to be generated. Notification needs to be triggered to the development team, either through Slack notification, email notification. But since we are trying to optimize things, it should automatically generate your Jira ticket or update your Jira ticket so that developer gets notified. And if there are certain operations tools in place, a right notification should be generated there so that right team can start taking ownership and start acting upon it. So that is one part of it. Once the build is generated, it has to be stored back into your container registry. And then the next phase starts with your automated test. You could execute your sanity, integration end to end, so on and so forth. And everything should generate reports, which should be sent back to the team so that they can take immediate actions. This is how we can achieve the shift left philosophy. Once this is the testing phase is completed and build is certified for higher releases, that is where your deployment happens or kicks in by choosing the right version of the artifact generated and deploying it onto your different set of environments. Once the deployment is completed, the pipeline workflow stops, but it doesn't stop. And if we go back to the continuous feedback loop, monitoring continues to happen with the right implementation of monitoring tools like Grafana, Prometheus, so on and so forth. So that this is about the pipeline workflow, and the interesting part is what qualifies for your continuous integration and what qualifies for your continuous delivery or deployment is highlighted in the respective boxes. So the build aspect, test aspect remains part of your continuous integration phase, and continuous delivery only talks about deploying it onto the target environment. So that was about the workflow part of it. Moving on, we have been talking at length about DevOps or DevSecOps, but we touched upon different benefits at different points during the discussion. But the key benefits of DevOps or DevSecOps implementation would be speed and how, velocity, microservices, continuous delivery. Velocity is the rate at which a team is shipping out the features. That is a velocity. Microservices, we spoke about it, breaking monolith into smaller implementation helps us achieve greater speed, continuous delivery, even if we have the two features like velocity and microservices, but the automation of continuous delivery is not in place, we cannot provide the right benefits to the end customer. So combination of these three would help us reap the benefit of speed, rapid delivery, agile methodologies. I spoke about it, how to plan and so on and so forth. Continuous integration, continuous delivery helps us achieve rapid delivery, reliability, continuous integration, delivery, monitoring and logging is one addition, which provides us right insights so that whatever issues identified in the current setup can be worked upon and help us achieve the reliable system for future. So that was about the reliability aspect. Scale. In order to scale, everything has to be automated. Infrastructure as code, which could include your policy as code, from a security standpoint, your configuration as code, and infrastructure as code would help us scale. And then your continuous integration and delivery also helps us scale in a non-Kubernetes platform. Improved collaboration. I spoke about team owning the end-to-end piece of the implementation from delivery to operations. Everything should be owned by the team. That is a philosophy which helps us achieve greater accountability. And then, so, okay, maybe I missed this part. I cannot recollect what this single point is. Anyways, moving on. Security. I spoke about invoking the right scan in your developer process as well as during the build process. That helps us achieve greater security. Infrastructure of as a code with right kind of policies getting included will help us greater security. So if based on enterprise's need and maturity level, we can have a DevOps implementation without security or DevSecOps implementation with security and quality. So within DevOps, there are multiple levels of maturity, and we need to understand the maturity level of the enterprise, and then based on that, it has to be gradually improved. So there are 5 levels of maturity. If the enterprise is at level 1, we should identify the areas how we can move from level 1 to level 2, level 2 to level 3, so on and so forth. That is a typical way of achieving the higher maturity level. So with that, I would like to sum up my monologue so far, and we can go back to question and answers.
I think participants can unmute themselves and ask the question to Anish directly.
Yeah. So Kirti, so before going to this Q&A session, so I would like to share a small quiz assessment which we have planned. Okay, I'm sharing, so participants, I'm sharing that exam link as well as access code in the chat box. So people can directly click on the link and enter your full name with email ID. So as well as it may require the contact number also you have to enter. So you can just directly, so after entering all the details, it will ask access code. So you can enter CSI 1404 so that you can start the assessment. So maximum takes time for 10 minutes, that's it. So please, anyone have questions? Please go ahead. You can unmute yourself and ask the questions.
While we are waiting for the questions, Anish ji, it's a wonderful session. Thank you very much. In fact, this program is also being played in an auditorium of IST's College for Women in Rajahmundry. There are more than 300 students are watching it. Wanted to,
Thank you, Chandra, for organizing this session at such large scale. Really appreciate that. And hopefully the students and the participants on the other side have gained some insights on the topic.
Yes, yes, definitely. Nowadays, the students are used to answer questions only, not ask questions.
Chandra, I have a question.
So might be Krishna is waiting for the question, I guess. Krishna, please go ahead.
Yeah. So basically, if we try to look at all the development, whether it's DevOps or let us say SAP development or Python development, if you look at the process is same. It's like continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment, and maybe sometimes we try to use extreme vertical programming or vertical fit delivery to the customer. What is the differentiation in the vertical DevOps application? It's a similar, right? So what are the additional things are there part of DevOps?
Good question, Krishna. Yes, your understanding is correct. DevOps is just a philosophy and set processes that needs to be implemented, be it in a SAP system, Oracle system, or a custom solution. That is immaterial. It is all about how we can ship features faster so that the customer benefits. And while shipping it, what different aspect we should consider? Quality is one of the key aspects. Security is another key aspect. How soon are we delivering it? Those are the different processes which DevOps or DevSecOps is highlighting, and implementing it in the customer landscape or enterprise landscape is something that needs to be evaluated, and how we can fit it in that landscape is there is a assessment or a discovery that needs to be carried out.
My second question actually related to, if you look at most of the IT industry, whether it's Capgemini or let's say Indian companies, almost 60 to 70% of investment is on the support. And continuous integration and what we call delivery is okay. But going forward, over a period, the support is going to be one of the critical area. So how DevOps is taking care these things across the vertical entire development life?
Sorry, Krishna, I was having really hard time to understand the question. Could you rephrase and speak a bit louder?
Yeah. I think that this support and maintenance is going to be very crucial in most of the IT sector today. Development is a one-time activity. Maybe it's a whether it's a agile model or it is a whatever continuous integration. It's a one-time activity or maybe multiple iterations. But once the product is ready, then what happens is maintenance is going to be very crucial. So nowadays, actually, the maintenance, how to integrate this maintenance part of DevOps? Is there any process part of the DevOps? Because if you look at SAP, what we try to do is normally the entire support activity we plan during the development, during the requirement phase itself. To try to identify what are the areas where we can support the support and maintenance is expected. And accordingly, we try to work out some more design changes part of the system. Just like security. You said security part of the DevOps. Similarly, for support is the activity there part of it.
So, thank you, Krishna. Let me share my understanding of your question, and which typically is targeted towards how DevSecOps philosophy can help the support activities, right?
Sure.
Okay, I'll take a step back. Support activity or maintenance activity is nothing but understanding the tickets and addressing those, right?
No, I differ here. Actually, basically what happens is, proactively you have to, during the development phase itself, what kind of support activities are expected? What then, how actually user can quickly configure the application for their support needs. If required, the users can able to enter the some kind of seed data part of the system. So these are the things actually developers normally try to miss out. During support phase, actually, once again, the support team need to once again go through the entire process and try to raise the tickets as a separate ticket part of the system. So nowadays, what is happening? Most of the projects like SAP or other projects, what they are saying, try to look at support is also one of the important activities and start from the beginning itself.
So, if I understand your question, you are talking about support during your implementation phase as well, right?
Yeah, proactively start from during the requirement phase itself.
Again, I would differ here. Yes, there are both the possibilities happening. Your DevOps implementation could be immature. That is where your typical problem statement lies, wherein you need to transform your existing system into DevOps way of working and also support your existing applications, right?
Yeah.
So typically, it can be done in multiple ways, but based on my limited experience, what I would suggest, support activities could continue to be done in parallel to your development activities. And if some changes happen in your feature, then your source code management tool becomes single source of truth. If some changes happen in one of your base classes, you just sync it into the existing new development branch. That is how you can achieve this changes done during the support and also include that in your new implementation. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you answered your question. I think let me try to add actually. Now, what is happening during the development itself? We are planning in testing also. Today we are planning security also. So parallel we are starting security, even testing also, like whether entire what the system testing we are planning in the beginning itself. Similarly, why now there is a trend where actually even you can start your support also part during the requirement phase itself and try to understand and try to implement as much as possible and to try to create some additional skills for users so that they can easily configure and easily support the future generation of products. That is the trend is going on. So whether DevOps is going to support that kind of thing, I just am asking that question.
So DevOps obviously is going to support all the initiatives that you may have in mind, and it always has to be done during your planning phase. Whatever you plan, you end up creating user stories, epics, so on and so forth. And when you start addressing or implementing those epics or user stories, that is how you can take the inputs from your assessment, parallel support assessment, and implement it in your DevSecOps journey.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Krishna, for your nice question. So Anish Kumar, thanks a lot. It's been such an honor to be a part of this Goliath webinar on behalf of our entire organization and as well as my fellow mates. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed speaker Anish and as well as ISTS for Women's Engineering College, who was playing this entire program in their auditorium, and participants also showing great interest on this particular topic. So Kirti, thanks a lot for you as well for arranging this program very successfully. Thank you, Kirti, and thank you, Anish Kumar.
Thank you, Harsha. Thank you, Chandra Garu, for giving us this slot and opportunities.
Heartfelt thanks for everyone. and especially to the participant who took time out to understand new ways. That is how we can grow as a community and become a better industry. So keep continuing the learning journey.
Thank you so much, Anish. Thank you. Thanks so much, Kirti. Harsha, you can stop the recording and